In January, Parnell's GAA club, a storied club with a rich 132-year-old history, went into liquidation.
In a riches to rags story, the Dublin club, which was once the wealthiest club in Ireland, is no more. And it has surrendered ownership of its clubhouse and pitches.
The collapse has raised major questions across the GAA about amateurism, corporate governance and finances.
This investigation from our reporter, Conor McMorrow.
This is a story like no other about a GAA club. A €22 million windfall from a land sale made it the richest club in Ireland.
It seemed the perfect deal because the timing of it was just about right, just before the bottom fell out of the market.
This is the story about a small sports club that made a fortune and lost it all again.
The entire case, from what I've seen, is just riddled with incompetence.
It points to very poor financial management and a business not being properly run.
Dublin GAA club Parnells have been wound up with a liquidator appointed.
Absolutely heartbreaking. It's like a death in the family.
This is a story that raises serious questions about the amateur status of the GAA and corporate governance in the organisation.
The expenses, the fuel cards, the accommodation, they were all classed as incentives to play for the club.
Where was the GAA? Where was head office in relation to this?
Primetime has obtained hundreds of documents that show how a €22 million bonanza was frittered away. This is the story of how Parnell's GAA club, one of the oldest in Dublin, went from boom to bust. In many areas of Ireland, the GAA club is a place where family, community and history combine. In Coolock, on Dublin's north side, for decades, that place was Parnell's. Parnell's had two players on the Dublin side in Croke Park on Bloody Sunday. Former Taoiseach Charlie Haughey played for them at a time. Clubman Brendan Quinn captained the 1942 All-Ireland winners and trained the Dubs to win Sam Maguire again in 1963.
Parnell's was my life. I was all my life going to football matches, being brought to football matches. This is me in 1950 as a 3-year-old mascot for Parnell's in the final of the Dublin Senior Football Championship. So that's the first recollection I have of Parnell's.
Liam's father captained Parnell's to Dublin Senior Football Championship titles in 1939 and 1945.
And he was the first man from Parnell's to win a senior football title for Dublin.
More recently, Parnell's players featured on All-Ireland winning Dubs ladies teams. And best known of all, Dublin goalkeeper and multiple All-Ireland winner Stephen Cluxton hails from the Coolock club.
I got involved through my husband, who would have managed teams for like 40-odd years. I was treasurer and whatever. So yeah, huge part of our lives. And it's a big hole now. Well, pre-2008, I mean, we had, like any other club, I'm sure, in the country, struggled to make ends meet. But there was certainly no excess money or nothing flahoolach or anything like that.
We never owed anyone. We were able to clear our debts. You might have to wait for your money, but you got it.
The club last won a Dublin Senior Football Championship in 1988. John Byrne was one of the stars of that team.
Parnell's has been an integral part of my life since I've been 8, 9 years of age, you know what I mean? I was chairman for 5 years. It's been a huge part of my life over the years.
Greg Walsh played with John in the 1980s. He has been a coach, a member of the club executive and has sponsored teams.
The great thing about GAA clubs is, you know, you become part of a community and you develop lifelong relationships, friendships, and some of my oldest friends I met playing for Parnell's, you know, so it had a huge influence on my life.
That integral part of the community is now gone. So how did it collapse? To understand that, we need to go back to 2008 when the club appeared to strike gold with the sale of some land.
Well, the club had some pitches near Dublin Airport at Collinstown Lane, which they'd bought in 1974 for £100,000. That land went on the market in 2008, just before the economic crash, and sold for £22 million. And with that money, they bought land in Coolock, which is their main catchment area where the club is located, and about half The 22 million went on the land acquisition, and the rest of it then was left over to develop facilities on the site.
Back in its natural heartland of Coolock, Parnell's entered a long-term lease with the Morris fathers. In line with GAA guidelines, the Dublin County Board was signatory to the lease and planning was approved to build new facilities including new playing pitches, a new clubhouse, a hurling wall and a new sports hall.
There was a 999-year lease with the Morris, and there were conditions attached to that lease, and that if those conditions were not fulfilled by the club, the Morris were legally entitled to take back everything.
A key feature of the lease agreement was Parnell's commitment to complete the build within 18 months. The sports hall and hurling wall were to be made available to the adjoining Chanel College Secondary School, which is run by the Morris fathers. 2 years after the sod turning by then Taoiseach Brian Cowan, Parnell's opened their new clubhouse in May 2012. The once modest GAA club was now marketing itself as the Chanel Leisure and Hospitality venue, which has a state-of-the-art gym, a restaurant and function room that was big enough and plush enough to cater for weddings. At the time of opening, the club was already in breach of the lease agreement, having not built the sports hall or hurling wall. The lands, beneath everything which had been built, were at risk.
It opened in a fanfare. There was a bit of controversy over changing the name from Common Parnell to the Chanel Leisure Centre, and that's where everything started going wrong. We were overextended.
It was clear very quickly that there were difficulties under the surface, that all was not well financially in the club and that the level of spending was astronomical and they were losing money.
Minutes from club meetings at the time, seen by Prime Time, show that some grassroots members of Parnell's were not happy.
My opinion is that Parnell's, when it opened in May 2012, ceased to be a GAA club. It became an entertainment venue from that day. And the football, the sporting end of it was secondary.
Primetime asked an expert in forensic accountancy to examine key files. Jim Luby has over 30 years' experience in business restructuring and insolvency.
It has lost money in all the years I've looked at from that trading. The consequence of those losses has resulted in the loss of a club to the local community here.
Primetime also asked Professor Niamh Brennan, one of the country's leading experts in financial reporting and corporate governance, to analyse the documents.
It was turned into a hospitality organisation, and that just destabilised the club. By 2014, the club had net current liabilities. It had negative cash flow, and that was the beginnings of solvency problems to emerge for the club.
I feel that they lost their way in relation to the way the GAA should be run, but also a volunteer organisation and a community organisation.
With the windfall from the land sale came increases in spending that would be eye-watering in any of Ireland's other 1,609 GAA clubs. Salaries rose hugely from just over €50,000 in 2007 to over €1.2 million in 2013.
All these figures were jaw-dropping, and anybody who was involved in the GAA club would look at those figures and be astonished.
The first set of financial statements I saw in 2007, there were 2 staff. Then by 2013, it had gone up to 69 staff. And that was bringing a huge overhead to the club, and it could not operate profitably or even at a break-even because the administrative overheads became overwhelming for the club. And that's just classic financial mismanagement, that the club was living beyond its means.
By January 2013, employee wages were costing €22,500 per week. The club's annual turnover was €3 million, with €1 million on wages. Clearly, with €1 million now being spent on wages, the club had become a commercial enterprise. But crucially, Parnell's remained a local GAA club, and other documents obtained by Primetime show money being spent in ways that would raise questions in clubhouses across the country. Primetime has seen a copy of the contract between Parnell's GAA club and Croke Park for 4 premium-level seats for a period of 3 years from January 2011 to December 2013 at a cost to the club of €16,000. A number of prominent footballers from outside Dublin transferred in to play for Parnell's as part of the club's quest to win Dublin County Championships. This brought with it its own issues.
All Dublin clubs have outsiders coming through and all that, and there's nothing unusual in that. I think the difference with Parnell's was that there were so many, and I remember noticing that in one championship game in 2012 against Ballymun Kickham's, 2/3 of the team were outside players.
I feel when Parnell's got the money, people migrated to the area that normally wouldn't have come into the area, and it kind of killed the dynamic of homegrown players and trying to produce homegrown players.
Can't buy a championship, can't buy a team, like, can't just drop a load of players in and expect them to go off and win county championship. It's not. I don't think it's possible.
Internal club documents seen by Primetime show the scale of money allocated to some within the club. One prominent player received €8,050 for coaching and €11,600 for travel and subsistence, a total of almost €20,000 over a 16-month period. A number of years later, a coach was paid €16,820 in travel and subsistence payments over a 9-month period.
I don't blame the players, because if somebody's willing to offer you an incentive to play for them, you're going to take it, you know. So I don't blame the players. I blame the people who gave them the benefits of playing for Parnells.
The Revenue Commissioners found reason to look into the club, and documents from them show how some players claimed large round-sum expenses that were unvouched. A senior club member claimed €120 per week for a home office with no evidence of costs incurred. This person also claimed between €300 and €400 per month in mileage with no details of trips taken. Senior players were found to be claiming mileage for trips including travelling to the club for training and travelling to another county for county team training.
Ransom expenses are a no-no, and Revenue are, very hot on cracking down on that. Expenses should be properly vouched. In an amateur sports club, I would have said Revenue, will have a little bit of leeway, won't be too draconian in their approach, but here it just seems like the compliance has been extremely poor over a period of 4, 5, 6 years.
In 2011, Parnell signed a lease on an apartment in Artane which was used by some players. The club paid the rent at a cost of €1,550 per month.
It was providing the apartment to the players. That's one of the things that got the club into trouble with the Revenue.
The club even paid the laundry and utility bills for players who lived in one of the apartments here behind us on the Malahide Road. At the same time, the club was paying utilities for the apartment. It was in arrears with the electricity bill and the clubhouse that was used by ordinary grassroots club members, including juveniles. Primetime has seen a final demand letter from utility company Energia to Parnells threatening disconnection of supply. In just 1 year, 2014, rent plus utilities on the apartment cost the club €22,978.
Rent live an apartment for players is something extremely unusual in my experience.
I don't dispute anybody getting expenses for coming to play for the club, but inducements to the level of accommodation, expenses and significant expenses, it flies in the face of amateurism, but it flies in the face of the GAA, what the GAA stands for, and what we were brought up in the GAA.
In an indication that the club was seeing itself as both a commercial and voluntary organisation, Primetime has also seen documents showing that in December 2014, gift cards with a total value of €9,000 were given to almost 100 people involved in the club, including some players. That same month, the club's financial statements showed an annual net liability of more than €1 million. Fuel cards were also supplied to certain people within the club, including players. Documents show that spending on 5 fuel cards regularly cost Parnells thousands a month. The cards were not phased out until 2015. As Parnells was incurring these expenses, the club was not paying affiliation fees to Dublin County Board. All GAA clubs are required to pay annual affiliation fees to their county board. This money is typically generated from subscriptions paid by grassroots members.
The club was paying these massive expenses and they weren't paying affiliation fees to the Dublin County Board. They weren't paying the creditors, they weren't paying the taxman, they weren't paying the rates, but yet they had money to pay for all these expenses, which ran into the hundreds of thousands.
The problems built up over time to the point where in 2016 Dublin County Board was threatening to withhold from Parnells the allocation of tickets for the All-Ireland final, which it distributes as standard to all GAA clubs in the county. That September, the County Board Secretary emailed the club outlining almost €68,000 in affiliation fees, insurances and registration fees owing. Relations had clearly become fractious. 2 years later, the County Board Secretary emailed Parnells to say a commitment to pay €10,000 per month had not been honoured. A later email stated, "This situation is now intolerable from the County Board perspective." The County Board were not the first to ask questions. Internally, there had been questions coming from members of Parnell's for years. John Byrne was among them.
I'm writing to request guidance and ask for your support in relation to what I believe to be a very serious issue for my GAA club.
As far back as 2011, John Byrne sent a letter to then GAA President Christy Cooney.
The threat to the continuing of Parnell's as a club is real, and already the club's auditor has expressed concern that the club will not have the funds to complete the hall, for which they are contractually obliged to build at a cost of €1 million. I looked for help in 2011. Nobody came to the rescue. I did have good engagement with Dublin County Board at different stages trying to get some resolution. The GAA knew about it, Dublin County Board knew about it. There were signatories of the finances. The grounds and the monies were vested in the GAA, so they should have taken a better control of it.
There's a line of duty there and responsibility. And at the same time, they can't manage or micromanage every situation or be everywhere to put out all the fires. But there is a sense that maybe they sat back a little bit and let Parnell's have too much autonomy when problems were brought to their attention.
Greg Walsh also asked questions about the club's finances at the 2012 AGM. He then contacted Sunday Independent journalist Dermot Crowe in the hope that highlighting the issues would open up debate within Parnell's.
Well, they were browbeaten and they weren't listened to.
Looking back, Dermot Crowe says Croke Park should have acted when red flags were raised in these years.
Ultimately, these facilities and the money and all that was made, it's GAA money, it's not necessarily Parnell's money. So the eye was taken off the ball this time, I think. The GAA has a certain responsibility.
While the Parnell's board worked to address their annual losses and cost reductions were made, the club continued to file losses year on year, and the 2017 financial statements record that maintaining a positive cash flow remains the greatest risk relating to club commercial activities.
It was just pie in the sky. Like initially the money was coming in, but it wasn't enough money coming in for the expenditure that was taking place.
I wonder how much planning was done when they got the 22 million. I wonder how much risk management there was. I just think it hurtled ahead with inadequate checks and balances.
The club's finances came to the attention of the Revenue Commissioners, who carried out an audit of the club in 2013, resulting in Parnell's paying a total settlement of €101,794.
Then they had another audit, revenue audit, in 2016, and they were fined for the exact same things. So even though they were fined in 2013 for not taxing expenses, they continued to pay the expenses and benefits without tax up to 2016.
Losses in all years, non-payment of liabilities, including non-payment of PAYE and PRSI, which is, something of a cardinal sin.
Underlining the financial stresses at the club, an internal email spelled out the situation. It's a straight match now for funds, revenue or suppliers.
The funny thing was that they seemed to have kept good accounting records. It was so good that when the revenue came in to do their audit, they found the records and they were able to identify clearly how much had been paid without the deduction of tax.
I think if you've had a revenue audit, one would imagine that a properly managed organisation would learn from that and not have it repeat itself and make the same mistakes again.
I find that just absolutely astonishing. And the revenue wrote them a very decent letter advising them on what to do, recommending that they make a voluntary disclosure to avoid interest and penalties. So I was amazed that that was ignored.
In late September 2014, Parnell's player and Dublin multiple All-Ireland winning goalkeeper Stephen Cluxton wrote an explosive letter to all members of the club executive. He outlined the reasons why he had taken the highly unusual decision to regrade down to play for the club's second team. The letter said, "I don't agree with the policy of headhunting players. I don't agree that county players are treated to various perks. I'm disgusted the club is now in debt." Parnell's never won a Dublin Senior Football Championship after 1988. Minutes from an executive meeting 3 months after Cluxton's letter show how financial issues related to the club's commercial activity were weighing on sporting decisions. One of the club's directors is recorded as saying, "We can save €100,000 if we get rid of coaches."
My guess is that the corporate governance was not at all up to scratch, and there's evidence of it because the auditors were qualifying the financial statements. That means that the auditors were giving a bad report year after year after year. They were flagging as early as 2014 that they questioned whether the company could continue in operational existence for the foreseeable future. And the auditors were right, because eventually the club had to go into liquidation.
In the period 2008 to 2025, when Parnell's effectively went from boom to bust, over 50 people served as directors on the board of the Parnell GAA Club Limited. The last financial statements filed were for 2018. With the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, things went from bad to worse for Parnell's. In order to try and help the beleaguered club, Greg Walsh and Liam Quinn, among others, returned to the executive.
In 2020, when I was part of the executive, we met with Croke Park in the hope of finding a solution to our problem. The club was in a really, really bad way because they had debts of close on €2 million. They had no prospect of paying that money back, none of it.
And when we brought this matter up with Croke Park, it was put to me that they couldn't micromanage everything. I felt we had been backed into a corner and there was nothing we could do. We were coming up against pressure that the Morris were threatening to take it back. We couldn't overcome it because the debts were too high. And we were being threatened with the courts, with people that were owed money.
Last November, Parnell's released a statement saying the clubhouse and pitches were handed back to the Morris fathers. And 132 years after it was founded, in January 2025, the club was wound up and a liquidator appointed.
Absolutely heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. It was like a death in the family. That's the only way I can describe it to you.
I know those people are no longer with us, but what do you think they would think of what unfolded in the last 15 years?
They'd be jumping around in their grave. From the half-crown donations that they made on a Sunday, maybe, to when I was a child.
I never wanted to be right, but it's come to fruition because people weren't listening. It's come to fruition because people thought they were bigger than the GAA. The last thing I ever wanted was Parnell's to not exist anymore. And it's really sad. It's a sad, sad time for anybody who was, part of the Parnell's family over the years.
Following the liquidation of the club, some are angry with the GAA hierarchy in Croke Park.
They're a club of 130 years in the association, but the GAA failed them. County Board failed them. They should have ring-fenced that money. Number two, it should have been project managed by the GAA, not by Parnell's. That's a fatal error.
When you think that Parnell's was the second oldest club in Dublin, and they let us go to the wall.
When the Parnell's GAA club went into liquidation, the list of unsecured creditors shows that the GAA is owed €475,000 and Dublin County Board is owed €300,000. The liquidation has brought to an end one of Ireland's oldest GAA clubs and a core part of the Artane Coolock community.
The statement of affairs that I've seen for the business before it went into liquidation is showing overall debts of about €1.5 million. About half of that is owed to the GAA. None of those creditors will receive any payment whatsoever.
Where was the GAA? Where was head office? I would have thought that the GAA should have some kind of oversight. I'm not talking about micromanagement. Had the GAA exercised its overall authority, overseen the club, kept a watchful eye on it, this might not have happened. I mean, you could say the GAA has lost 22 million. That's a lot of money.
In a statement, the GAA and Dublin County Board said the association at central and county level has worked with successive club executive committees and have explored multiple options to support the club in securing the viability and future of Parnell's GAA club. Unfortunately, despite the best efforts of all concerned, this was not possible to deliver. The GAA continues to offer support, guidance and advice to all of its 1,600 units as required, but ultimate responsibility for a club's affairs and related governance matters rests with the membership and executive officers of each individual GAA club. In late January, a new club called Pobal Parnell was formed. The new entity does not have access to the clubhouse or playing pitches in Coolock.
There was good, genuine people in Parnell's. We shouldn't lose sight of that. And they were concerned about you know, if they'd have a club and all that. And you know, we have to understand that there's still a lot of very good volunteers, and they were still committing, and they had the right values at heart. That's Pobal Parnell now. It's about survival now. It's going back to the very basics and continuing on with basic facilities, and I suppose in some sense starting from scratch.
I think they have an uphill struggle. I wish them the best.
The club that has been so important to the Coolock Artane area for over a century has been wound up, a huge loss to the community.
I feel very sorry for the players and their families. They have had to watch a very, very prestigious GAA club collapse in this way.
At the end of the day, it's where Parnell's was. I played there for 40 years, and now that's gone, and it's been taken from the community, which I don't think is right. You know, I think something needs to be done. I think people need to come together, because it benefits the community. It benefits everybody if it's open, and it shouldn't have been closed.